What did we talk about last week? What stood out to you all of what we talked about last week?
With the idea of faith and going over how our year in perspective was and what to work what we want to personally achieve within 2022.
Yeah, good, very good. So one of the other things that thought was really important is like getting in a rhythm, right? Getting in a schedule, understanding what you want to do and how you can accomplish that by creating these tangible goals that you want to see in your life so you can get to that final place that you want to be in. And when we think about that, we talked about creating a schedule that fits for yourself, not just like a typical idea of a schedule that you heard someone else say, like really looking at your day-to-day life and saying, where can I fit this into my schedule? And I gave y'all the example of my life where I found that, you know what, early in the morning really worked for me. I thought that was a great space and I tried that out. And then also during lunchtime and after work was a time where I was able to build and create dim events. And I think that's something that is very important for us to just think about, really to move forward in and assess where we are. But also at the same time, we talked about this idea of faith without works is dead. So like really trying stuff out during that time. Where can you try stuff out and see what works and what doesn't work for our schedule? Because we say we want to get to these dream goals and these dream careers, but are we creating tangible steps to get to that space? And today I really want to just dive into how to stay in your rhythm and pace of being in your dream job. I think how many of you have just like listened to a podcast where you're like, man, that podcast really motivated me, but I don't really know how to like continue with that momentum that that person gave me, right? I don't really know how to like focus in on this schedule that Mo just talked about. Okay, like I see that I can create a schedule for myself, but when I don't execute on that specific thing in my schedule, then I really get down on myself. How many of you are really harsh on yourself when you can't execute an idea or thing? Okay, cool. What happens during that time? What do you usually say to yourself?
Why didn't I think of this before?
Okay. What else?
Why am I like this?
Okay. Anything else?
Why didn't it work out usually? Because things tend to work out for me.
Yeah, 100%. And these are all real feelings, right? These are all things that we're going to go through. And one of the things that I was thinking about when these episodes or these things happen is, okay, why didn't this work out? Why is this happening? All these things. And sometimes those questions can end up deterring me for the next few days, right? Rather than it just being a moment, it turns into like a week long of like talking bad to myself, talking down to myself. And then naturally you might go into a state of depression if you don't know it's depression, but that might be right outcome of that specific space of talking to yourself. And I was listening to like a few sermons and conversations, and I was just like, it's really important to have these dialogues with ourselves, right? How many of you talk to yourself? Raise your hands real quick. Cool. Talking to yourself is the key to success. People used to be like, talking to yourself is weird, but I think it's the key to success. And how you talk to yourself can really affect your day-to-day life. So this is really what I want us to talk about, because how you talk to yourself contributes to this consistent rhythm and pace of getting to where your dream is, right? Whatever your ultimate dream is. And we talked about dreams are okay with like shifting. One year you want to go into this, and then maybe you accomplish your dream and now you want to go to this next part. That is all okay. But talking to yourself will help you to keep in that rhythm and in that pace. And one of the things that I think is so important, and what we talk about with going with faith, going with love, going with intention, has to do with understanding self. So 2022 should be the year that we focus on understanding ourselves. And when we talk about understanding ourselves, I mean making this a habit. So something that I've really been trying to challenge myself on is creating a daily habit of this. But if I was honest with myself, when I first thought about this idea, it didn't start as a daily habit, right? It started as a monthly habit, then it turned to a weekly habit, then it turned to a daily habit. And I made that natural progression. And one of the things we'll talk about is how can you be real with yourself to say, okay, I have this goal, but I listen to a podcast and this person does it every single day. And maybe I know with myself, I can't do this every single day. So how can I at least do this weekly? How can I do this monthly? So really making sure you're checking in with yourself and understanding what fits with your specific schedule, what fits with your rhythm, what fits with your pace, what fits with your day-to-day life, right? What fits with all of these things, and shift it and focus it into something that is pertinent to you as a person. I think just really figuring out what that daily habit is or that monthly habit is, really just, I think self-reflection can be a starting point of just sitting there and really looking through your life, right? I think what I always do is sometimes I'll just sit down in my room and look through different pictures, because I archive a lot of the stuff that I've done in my life. And I look through like, okay, this is a space where I was thinking this was very important to me. And this is a space where I thought helping other people is very important to me, right? So understanding what are the parts that you've grown, right? What are the parts that you're interested in seeing yourself grow? And then what are these new expressions of yourself that are continuously showing up, right? How do I start to understand that? How do I start to dive into that? And really looking deeper into that, because that helps to get to where you want to be in life. One of the things that I always think of is this internship. I always say, how many students we've put into amazing jobs is really great, but it didn't start like that until I understood, oh, this is a space where I feel self-fulfillment, right? This is a space that really feels important, because I was trying to get into my dream career and I couldn't see anyone who would help me, or a program that would help me to get into that space. So as I started to discover these nuances and these smaller parts of myself, I really understood, okay, this is something that fits. So how do we build on this? How do we create on this? And this all started from an idea, right? And you are living in that manifestation of this idea that I didn't know existed until I started to try things out, things that we talked about last week, trying these things out, moving in that space, seeing what worked and what didn't work. And now it's in a space where it's working as a operating company and machine and things of that nature. The next part is loving those not so perfect areas of ourselves. How many of us focus on loving those areas of ourselves that we don't feel perfect in? Any example of what you do in that space? Anyone have any examples of that?
An example of how you express that, like, focus on the imperfections?
Yeah, just loving it, like being okay with it.
First, I'll like do a reality check of like, okay, here I'm at, we're here, where this is where I'm at. And then I'll try to frame it in like kind of a grateful way of like, I'm grateful I'm experienced this, so I can like, transform it into XYZ.
Yeah. Good. Very good. Thanks for being vulnerable in that space. Anyone else want to share?
For me, I try to literally ignore it, like it's not even there. But I feel like I think reflect on those areas and then like work at them. Sometimes not even work at them, but like embrace it in a sense, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think embracing it is so important, right? I used to do the same thing as you, Jamima. I feel like I would just be like, okay, I don't like that, so I'm just gonna act like it doesn't exist. And then it would slowly like bubble up and exist in my life. Even if I wasn't fully expressing it, it would be like subtly expressed through things. And I'm like, why does that thing keep showing up, right? I think we talked about this earlier when you talked about like, why am I doing this, right? And not by pushing it aside, we don't really understand why I'm doing it. And I think that's what we'll talk about a little bit later, but being real with ourselves in that space to understand, why does this realistically continue to happen? I think one of the things that I try to focus in on is saying to myself, like, I know I'm not perfect in these areas, but I'm also working on these areas. And then really being and looking at myself, and this ties into that self-discovery and checking in with yourself, but really going through the week and saying, you know what, this week, I'm super proud about being able to do this, right? For me, Timeliness, organization, and communication are three things that I've really been focusing in on mentally. And I feel like, all right, sometimes I make great decisions and I schedule it. And yesterday is a great example of it, right? Thursdays are my day where I focus on dreaming ideas, thinking of things. Like that is from like 10 a.m. until like 4 p.m. That is what I focus on in complete silence and just listening to those ideas and letting them flow out. But yesterday we had to do a video shoot, and that was like a whole production, and then got my hair done, but she was super late. So that threw off my day. So I had all these things scheduled out, but it didn't work in that space. And I had to talk to myself to say, you know what? This is not working out how you want it to, but where can we find these pockets during this time to like get some of the stuff done, right? Where can we find these little nuances to say, you know what? It's okay that this didn't happen, but how can I move forward? Because I really could have just been like, you know what? Fuck this. Today is a wash. All of this is trash, right? But what I ended up doing is like writing out your assignments while I was waiting for my hairdresser, who was at that point almost 2 hours late, and just writing assignments out while I was sitting there waiting. And like those things helped to get to today to make it feel a little bit more manageable rather than coming in today with like not having anything. And I think that's something where rather than just being very harsh, be like, okay, proud of this, not so proud of this. And I also think my hairdresser was just having a bad day. And the last thing I want to do is be like, all right, because I was late, I'm just going to be trash to you. That would just not be kind, right? That wouldn't be anything that we would really want to do. So just really sitting there and opening up and listening to what she was dealing with, and, you know, just being a listening ear. So sometimes, you know, you have to let that day speak to you, let the week speak to you, let the month speak to you, because there's things you can't control, but it's how do you react to those things that are in your control that can help not only yourself, but others around you can be very, very important. And then the last thing I would say is let's focus. And I kind of jumbled into those things. So I think that first part is loving yourself, right? The other part within that was being real with ourselves. How do we be real with ourselves? And Nico alluded to that. So how can you be real with yourself on these days to say, cool, proud of this, not so proud of this, but let's look at why this specifically happened, right? And one of my workarounds for yesterday would have been, okay, on Wednesday or on Tuesday, because I knew I had a lot going on Thursday, I should have got y'all assignments done, or should have got the assignments and the big ideas executed on a different day instead of focusing on still trying to get done on that Thursday. That's my workaround. That's how I can figure it out and be real with myself to say, these are things that I can really adjust. And if you do this with your day-to-day habits, with your monthly habits, with your weekly habits, it makes it a lot more manageable. And then now when next week comes, you know how to go into next week if a similar situation comes up. And then the greatest thing, like I said, is listening to that day. And I think that's where faith is so important, and understanding the unknown. When you don't understand what's going to happen, you just have to kind of react to it, right? You really don't know what your natural reaction is going to be, but by talking to yourself, that will help for you to understand, okay, this is how I can maneuver it, or this is how I can be real and express my emotions during this time. And maybe that's going to be a day, right? Maybe I need a day to express my emotions to myself. Maybe I need 2 days, right? Maybe I need 3 days. And being okay with that, because you have to ultimately check in with yourself, right? Nobody externally can tell you this is what is going to work for you. You have to figure that out for yourself. And that just is a trial and error thing. And that can be some of the toughest parts. Being real with yourself and being okay with the circumstances of the day, you have to look at the greater picture of it, right? Like, how did I help? How did I benefit someone, not only just myself, but other people around me, but not letting that paradigm shift where it's like, all right, I'm giving to people, but I also can't rejuvenate and recharge myself. So you have to kind of figure out what is your natural balance in that. And then the last thing is always be careful on how this all ties into things that naturally affect you, whether it's social media, whether it's friends groups, right? Whether it's family. During these times, you have to really understand how those things will naturally affect you in your day-to-day life, right? Because sometimes social media can be a thing where You might waste 30 minutes on it, but also it can be a cool resource and tool for you to get inspiration from different things. But then it can also lead to comparison, right? So how are these things affecting your lives? There's things you should definitely continue to check in on, understand, relate to, reflect on, just really go into that scope of what can I do to understand all of this and how can I build from it? Does that all make sense? Cool. So as you all know, I got an activity for you. 3 questions I want you to answer. One of those questions being, how can I work on discovering new parts of myself? Whether it's monthly, whether it's weekly, whether it's daily, right? What can I do that's tangible? The other parts of that is, what are areas I'm not the nicest to myself in, and why is that? Let's address that. Why do we feel like we're not the nicest to ourselves in that area? And then the last part, how can I talk nicely and positively, but still hold myself accountable? And this is the thing that I say, it's always going to be adjusting, right? This is not like a perfect thing where it's like, all right, this is my method and this is the only thing that works, because there's going to be things that happen in life that aren't expected, right? You're not going to know how to naturally relate to that or speak to that or understand that. So those are the 3 questions I want you all to answer. I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms, and then I'll give you the next 10 minutes, but come back and then we're going to share these different things, okay?
Yeah, I can share a bit. So McKenna is an artist who works a lot with like digital media, but also fine arts. For fine arts, things naturally, turn out pretty successful on the first time. And that's a pretty satisfying feeling. But when it comes to digital media, it isn't always just a first hit wonder. It takes more time, it can be, requires more fine tuning, more of a learning curve. And there's an aggravation there that kind of like hits immediately when things don't go right the first time. So he's working on that.
Okay. Very good. Who else wants to share?
I'll go. So me and Sabrina were talking about how our goal and mindsets are and kind of habits we can start changing specifically when it comes to the career path. So an example she said was that she had a representative email her in the middle of the night and she forgets that we have different time zones. And, it kind of made her feel a little bit defeated because, she's a really big go-getter when it comes to career. And something I suggested was, since she's a planner, she could start adding alarms and trying words of affirmation. I'm a big believer in that, at least, where you just write something, and if you practice speaking it or just seeing it every day, you'll visually get in that mindset.
Yeah, Kim, I just like took advice from Kim because she practices that and practices detachment of things, where I have this harshness on myself a lot because of the time zone. I missed the deadline. So I was quite bummed about that. And it was a really great opportunity that I missed just because of a deadline. An example she gave me in return was that on Wednesday when we spoke, she was stressing a little bit because she wanted a study abroad opportunity, but financially it was not going her way. And she was just like, throwing her hands like, I don't know anymore. And she went to her advisor just for a casual session, and the advisor found out about it and just wrote her a check because she's like a hard worker and does well in school and so forth. So it was just because she kept positive on Wednesday and said, I hope things turn around and I know everything will work out, and then it did. So I kind of just took that story as a way of keeping my head up.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story too. Yeah. And that's where we got to just be okay with that unknown. That's where faith comes in. And I think everyone has a situation where they just thought it wouldn't work out and it ended up working out. And, for me, I always say it's nothing but God. It might be the universe to you, but just being okay with that unknown and letting it speak to you, because so many times we're trying to like force the unknown to do something for ourselves, but being okay with being like, all right, I'm just going to give this to the unknown, let it go, let it just operate in its space and it'll speak back to you. And in these sessions, that's why I always want you all to have conversations with one of you, because I always do these automatic rooms, but I believe everything happens for a reason. And when we go into our life and in our intentions, focusing on everything happens for a reason, we can clearly reflect on why these things are happening. What am I contributing to it? But then what is also God or the universe speaking back to me as I look at the day that has formed before me? And that's why I think it's very important to wake up, have your routine, have your rhythm, and set that intention. Like Kim was saying, how can you set an intention daily? Right? If you can get in the space of setting an intention daily, now your mindset is already focused on where you want to go, but you don't also, right? And that's why you got to figure out that equal balance. You don't let that dictate where you want to go and how you move in that space. You got to let the universe speak to you, let God speak to you in that space and say, all right, this happened. Cool. So now, based on my positive mindset, how do I move forward in that? And we have to be okay with it. Perfect. Thank y'all for sharing. Anyone else want to say anything before we wrap up?
I'll say something quick. So Nico talked about how I can talk nicely and positively to myself. He mentioned how he tries to just put everything in perspective a little bit and be like, yeah, this is really awful right now, but like it could be way worse. Like I have a roof over my head and good friends, great family that I can rely on, that kind of thing. So
that's perfect, right? Like putting that into perspective can be so helpful, because there's a lot of things that are going on in this world, and putting it into perspective. And then I think that other part of it is like appreciating where you currently are. Where you are currently is a good space. It's a space that you're meant to be in. Now it's how do I continue to move forward? Because realistically, you can't change anything in the future. You can only change what's happening right now. So the more that you're comfortable with the right now, rather than just only focusing on the future, that's the only way you'll get to that next step and where you want to go. Give yourselves a round of applause. Let's end this off strong. And like I always say, if no one said this to you today or this week, I believe in your goals and your dreams and your aspirations, and say that to yourself, right? I think that's also very helpful. But I just know how important it is for someone to believe in what I wanted to do. And I didn't hear that at the beginning of my career. So I want to say that to you all every time we end these sessions. So go into today thinking in that space, and I'll see you later.